looking forward to this all week. And I think one of the great things about AA, which the basis of the program is that I must realize that to recover, I have to find power outside of myself to do that. And the beauty of AA is that, whether I'm a true believer, or a spiritual guy, or an atheist, or an agnostic, there's room for all of us in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we all can recover based on that idea of finding a power that will provide me the ability to recover. And I love Robin, and the fact that he and I can talk, and from a label perspective, we would say that we don't agree. But the fact of the matter is, I think we agree on a whole lot more than you would think by talking in labels only. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this. And I give you guys Robin from Perth, Australia. Robin, take it away.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Stella. Thanks, Kimberly. Thank you so much for asking me to come. I've been contemplating this for over a week. So got a couple of things I want to start with is sometimes it's important to acknowledge that there are really big differences in our humanity and our life's journey before alcoholism took its place, and those differences will then, of course, appear later on. And also we come from different societies, different structures in society, different politics, different all sorts of things. So I'm going to tell you my life story, and I'm going to tell you my story before AA and my life in AA as best I can. So it starts with the fact that my father was one of those guys that was in the Second World War. Before he was in the Second World War, he was brought up in privilege. After he left school at 15, which he had a very, very traumatic time. His father was seriously mentally ill and beat him and a few other things. And then he went to war, and that affected him seriously. And he came back from that no longer in a life of privilege, and he became a Marxist because of what he saw during the war and became anti-fascist. He actually got thrown out of America by the FBI in 1947 for putting a ban the bomb sticker on a letterbox, on a post box. It was seen as a risk. So that was my heritage. I was born in 1960 in a hospital in London, and my mother, who had a very small frame, was on the gas for 16 hours, and I was born with serious brain damage. It affected my motor coordination, and it affected my capacity to take in information and also get information out. So my childhood was one of lots of incidents. Sinking in swimming pools at school, cut fates, drawing fire truck on the blackboard with a PH, constant humiliation, constant failure, constant can't kick the football when it comes towards me, can't hit the baseball, all that stuff. Riding my bicycle into the back of parked cars, standing on my own feet. So that sort of stuff really seriously affected me. I also had this unstable father who was likely to erupt at any minute and scream and shout and cut himself or whatever. Also with that, because of his background, I had this other double life, which was I lived in not poverty, but my father was a bus driver, but I also went to private schools, one of the ones the same as the royal family went to. So during the day, I'd be surrounded by people in Rolls-Royce Corniches, and at night I'd be at home with no hot water in a cold bed, having a bath in a tin tub in the kitchen. And that kind of dichotomy just never stopped for me. I was brought up with this large vocabulary and capacity to mix and all of that sort of stuff that I was taught at private school, and the total inability to be able to turn that into any reality at all in anything I did. And that went on and on and on. And at 14 years old, I had my first beer. And when I had my first beer, something miraculous happened. Nothing when I drank it, but the next day I couldn't walk. I literally couldn't walk. But I felt very relaxed. And I was not a relaxed kid. I was a constantly distressed kid. So my very first beer pretty well told you the story. Massive consequences and a massive effect. And I went on to do the things that you do when you start drinking. It was a slow process, but always big consequences. And, the consequences in my life that were going on around me already were that, I had a serious sugar habit. I already ate like tons of candy, like not like normal amounts. I mean, massive amounts of candy. And I was good at three things. I could ride a bicycle, I could ride a motorbike, or four things actually. I could smoke lots of cigarettes. And I could paint houses. That was pretty much my whole thing right there. But that was it. That was my whole ability. So what happened was it progressed very quickly, and my parents left for England when I was 17 years old, and I ended up in Australia on my own at 17. But within the year, I was living in a doss house in Manly, which is a local suburb. And I would literally come crawling home drunk. And because there was no one in charge of my behaviour, I was often in hospital with things like pyorrhea, which is all your gums bleeding with pus from lack of eating. I would quite often have fits and not know why. I didn't know I was detoxing. So the local council decided to have me taken away at 18 years old to a Christian farm to have me sorted out. And on that farm, which I've never had anything to do with, having been brought up an atheist, they were really nice and all that sort of stuff, and I couldn't get a drink. It was bloody horrible. So I started smoking aspirins. I highly don't recommend it, but that's the kind of alcoholic I am. You put me... And when I left that place, I went into a pub and I drank half a beer and said, I must have control now. Within a week, I was in the same doss house that I'd left, in the same condition that I was. And within a couple of weeks, I was carving up my arms and doing all the usual things that I did. I had no idea I was alcoholic. I thought that I was a seriously disturbed human being. I took lots of other chemicals, mainly pharmaceuticals. And they were for behaviour control for me. And the reason that I took them was if I drank, I couldn't cash my dog check. So I'd have to smoke marijuana to go put my dog check in. So that stuff all progressed. And what happened was I then had this normal period in my life where I went and stayed with a friend of mine, and his parents were what I would call manageable alcoholics. They had wine and alcohol everywhere, but I had to work and I had to do stuff like that. I was back in racing motorcycles, and my life was sort of semi-okay for about a year. I mean, I could drink as much as I want and do whatever I want, but I had to go to bed and get up and stuff like that. After that year, what happened to me, I was back out on my own again. And what that meant was within a very short period of time, my drinking was completely out of control. I couldn't manage it at all. I couldn't even manage it with chemicals. And I started to get seriously deluded. And I already had a capacity for mental illness anyway. I'd already had my first suicide attempt at 16. So I had these different attempts at control. Like I would say to myself, I'm never going to drink again. And I would get up in the morning and buy a mandarin. And then I'd think, an orange juice would be a good idea. And then I thought a vodka would be a good idea. And that stuff would happen to me again and again and again. Whenever I would make a decision not to drink, it had happened. The magic would occur. And so I had basically a complete mental breakdown in alcohol. I could no longer function. I wouldn't know if I was getting in the bath or out the bath. I was hearing voices. I was seeing babies' heads rolling around my feet. I'd have to poke my finger in my eye to know if that was the room I was looking at or if it wasn't the room I was looking at. Everything would go purple. I was done. It was over. And I was getting worried I was about to get locked up because I'd accidentally choked people when they said good morning to me and things. So I was really in serious trouble. And my drinking was completely out of control. I could drink a case of beer or whatever. I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I went to my first AA meeting. And when I sat in that meeting, and this is old-fashioned Australian AA, so you couldn't hardly see the speaker because everyone smoked like I did. And there was lots of table thumping and shouting and lots of guys with bulbous noses and all of that sort of old-fashioned AA stuff that I got sober in. And it was all about the first drink. And a guy grabbed me and he got my phone number off me because he could see my state. And he started calling me. A week later, him and his sponsee picked me up and took me to a detox. I spent 4 days strapped to a bed in that detox. I had to be helped to walk to the toilet because I couldn't see anything because of the delusions. And I just thought that I just had mental problems. I didn't really think I was alcoholic. And the guy next to me was doing this. Oh, I'm really sick from heroin. And I'm like, for 4 days. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm sick. And then the guy from the hospital, it was a big mental hospital, where the place was. They wanted to put me in a locked ward. And anyway, I got out of it. And I just did the AA thing, and they had an AA program in there. And then I joined AA, and what I did was everything that they told me to do. I joined a group. I had this sponsor that everyone said was a bastard who told you what to do, and we had to do lots of service. And I did lots and lots and lots of service. And I had the obsession of the mind for the first 7 years I was in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not have any relief from the obsession to drink alcohol. What I did have was a whole load of actions that I took that kept me here. And those actions, and remember, every day sober in AA was 1,000 times better than what I'd been experiencing drinking. So even though I may be making it sound like it was really crap, in comparison to not knowing what's going on and all the other delusions and crap that I was in, it was actually a holiday. And what I got was a service-based recovery, because in those days they used to say, if you're not drinking, you've had a personality change. And that's what we thought, and that's what we were told. And we had big book studies that were kind of like, well, what do you think it means? And that was what we did. And I did that for 7 years, And then what happened was I started to really go crazy in Alcoholics Anonymous. I just wanted to die all the time. I just wanted to drink all the time. Oh, I just missed a bit. When I was 2 years sober, I almost drank, and I went into a rehab after this 2 years sober. And the guy said to me, the psychologist said to me, now, you've got so much mental illness, we can either prescribe you enough medications so you can dribble in the corner for the rest of your life, and you have the right to do that because there's so much wrong with you, or you're going to do this sober without medication and you're going to be in a lot of pain, but you'll be in the real world. And he said, that's a choice I'm giving you because the mental illness that you have is mainly about depression. And I said, well, I've already tried medication from what I've been doing. So, yeah, let's go. And what happened was I did this 5 meetings a day thing, 2 meetings a day things for 7 years. And like I say, I had a service-based recovery. I hardly could hold down a job. I usually couldn't. and then I met this guy, and in between that, well, what happened then when I met this guy? He said, "You have untreated alcoholism." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm sober." He said, "Sobriety, abstinence is not the treatment for alcoholism." And he'd been taken through the book by a guy from Pompano Beach in Florida who traveled around at the time. And this guy took him through Wesley Parish, I think the guy's name. And the guy took this guy through the book over a weekend, and then he never saw him again. And he took me through the book, and I had a personality change, you know. And he said, you've got to come up with a concept of a higher power. And most people's higher power talks through their conscience. And I went, okay, done. Because I can hear my conscience. I can't shut the bloody thing up. Let's go. And that was my first relationship with a higher power in relationship to the program, was the steps and this voice in my conscience. And then what happened was I started to do what a lot of people do when they get the big book in their hands, who don't have an identity. I became a fanatic. And I had a big book meeting, and I, did all of that sort of stuff. And I went and met a guy called Joe McQuaney in Little Rock, Arkansas, and went through the book with him and did all this other work, and just became, a raving big book maniac. But what happened for me was I found my place more solidly in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was a big deal, And the other thing that I got given was I got another spot. I got a sponsor in Little Rock, and he told me because what was happening for me was, and he explained it to me, was that the cycle in the doctor's opinion of the repeating the same mistakes was not happening to me just in relationship to alcohol. It was happening to me in my life. I still was not able to change areas of my life, and I was keep having the same idea and having the same consequences. And he gave me a set of directions on how to change that, and it was a list of doing the opposite of what I wanted, and these were all selfless acts, and I won't go into them now. But that selflessness and those selfless actions changed my life because it gave me something to hang on to and to have healthy behavior no matter what. Now I want to get on to a couple of really important things, and one of them is my program in relationship to my life. After I was about 5 years sober, I'd never had really much of a sexual life when I was drinking because I was pretty busy looking at the carpet or whatever. I wasn't really kind of a relating guy, I was much more, your favorite drunk. I was either tied up in the back of something or wandering around aimlessly, deluded. I wasn't really, my best line was, "Hey, baby," and that was about as far as it had ever got. And so, I had this affair with this married woman, and after I'd had this affair, and this was 5 years sober, I had this affair, I felt like the biggest piece of shit that had ever sucked there. And I went, I can't do this. So I made a decision that if it wasn't for love, I wasn't going to do it. And a little while later, I'm going to probably cry, but I'll get it back. A little while later, I met my current wife. And when we met, I said, look, we seem to get on and we're good friends and all that stuff. But I want to know that this has some real value. And we're either going to become good friends or, whatever. But for a year, we're going to just hang out, just be mates. And this is the kind of thinking that has happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. That I see things differently and I've acted differently. So we hung out for a year and decided we got on all right, and later on we became married. And that grounding in how committed we were for each other then became really important later on. I always had failed at everything that I'd done scholastically, so I decided to do a year of matriculation. And you hear lots of these great stories in AA of these big successes and how people turn their life around. So I did a year of matriculation. At the end of the year, people got A's, B's, C's, E's, and F's. I got a piece of paper saying good effort. That was it. And I said, what's it going to take to get a matric? He said, between 3 to 9 years for you. What's it going to take to get a BA? Between 3 to 9 years. I said, all right, I'm done. And this kind of stuff would always happen to me. I would go and do a course and I would fail it. I would do a Red Cross course and I would fail it. I would do numerous courses and I would fail it because I couldn't do the paperwork and I couldn't get it right. And I was one of these people in AA where everyone was coming in and shooting goals at 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8, and I wasn't going anywhere. I was on unemployment benefit. I later became on a full life pension. My life wasn't going anywhere externally. And I'll fill that in a bit more later, but I couldn't hold a job down either. And then what happened was my son was born after we got married. And within 9 months of my son born, I'd do what all heroes did. I left. I got in my $300 car and I drove away because I felt like such a piece of crap. I couldn't bear being around them. I couldn't carry my weight. I couldn't do it. And I ran away. And I went and lived in my car for numerous period of time. And I rang up my sponsor and my sponsor said, and I also rang up my wife at one stage who was very rude to me and said lots of nasty words that hurt my feelings, which I won't tell you, but she's very inappropriate. Anyway, so my sponsor said to me, you need to go back and make it a family. And I said, you don't seem to understand. She said, we're done. And he said, no, you do what you have to do no matter what. You do the right thing. So I came back and I tried to do that. And I was pitiful at it. I was a crappy parent. Like some people are natural parents. Well, where I come from, you scream at people and you leave. That's all I knew. And I was not good with not knowing how to do that. So, I stayed. Anyway, my wife didn't get much support because she was in South Australia. She didn't get much support from my family, who were self-obsessed maniacs. So my sponsor said, you need to support her to go over to Western Australia where her family is. And I went, oh God, he's not listening either. So all these people that don't listen. I said, I'm on a pension. I've got a house. I had arrived. I've got a little motorbike and everything's perfect. And he said, you have to do the right thing before anything else. So we came over to Western Australia, and I came over here to support Leslie and my son. And I ended up living in another DOS house, just like I used to when I'm self-supporting. And my life was shite. But the most important thing that happened was I found out what really mattered. And this is what I'm trying to say about the program is taking the right actions no matter what. And what happened from that was I slowly, bit by bit, ended up being able to come back into the household, and eventually I was able to, and I was still losing jobs. I was still, same deal, nothing different. I didn't get a new brain or anything. And eventually I started working for myself. So doing the right thing, no matter what, was really an important part of my life. And that's probably been massive for me, putting principles first, other people first. And, what I was told was to always think of others and to experience that capacity for love inside of myself, because I'd never ever experienced any, and people would say, love yourself. And I don't even know what they're talking about. But when I love others, I can experience that love. And I've experienced that many times in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to take you through a quick, can someone give me a 15-minute warning at some stage if we get there? I want to take a quick walk through my experience with sponsorship. My first sponsor was a total dictatorial, old-fashioned, controlling bastard, and he saved my life. My second sponsor used to stick crystals in my ear and bits of cotton around my wrist and tell me that the goddess loved me. That was the type of AA I was in when I came in. What can you say? That's what we did. And when I met John C, what I had was a relationship with a man that told me actions, and then also the information in the book. Then I met Joe McQuaney and another guy in Little Rock, and what I then experienced was direction in my life that affected the way that I behaved. And that completely changed everything for me. Unfortunately for me, it was in a very heavy-handed way. And I transmitted that in Australia, and it went down like a lead balloon. I was not a popular guy because I was doing what I was being shown. And what I had to find out was I had to find a way of doing it different. And as my heart softened, my actions softened. And that was really important for me. And today the way that I sponsor is much more about, let's have a relationship with who you are. So tell me who you are. Tell me what you think. Then let's have a relationship with the information in the book. Is there anything there in common? And then let's go from there and find out how these tools affect us. And working and I'd like to go on to this place now for me, which is really a big deal, which is working the steps in my life. Working the steps in my life has gone from that place of a relationship with some tools and some actions that adjust some stuff so that I can start to have some freedom from the obsession of the mind, which I got at 7 years, to cleaning up some of the past, to having a better relationship with my conscience and being able to really hear what's being said to me and being able to hear you and interact with you and the world. That's been a really big deal for me, to do that and to understand that. But as the program's grown, as I've grown in a relationship with the program, one of the things that's happened for me, each step has become much deeper. Step one for me is the foundation for all change in my life. Knowing that at the root of me lies a mind that is completely in conflict with the truth. That will do nothing but cause me harm and people around me harm. That my perceptions from my thinking are incorrect. And that the only correct and the only appropriate response to that is to welcome step two. And step two is a relationship with no conflict with the truth of who I am and no conflict with where that takes me next, which is to change. Right? If I've done step two, there is no problem with the relationship and the desire to be guided by the truth. And that's what's happened for me from 1 and 2, is that any time that, my mind's giving me information, as soon as I'm barely conscious of it, I know that I have no desire for it and I seek the truth, And 4 and 5 are this amazing mechanism that starts like this. The program's like from kindergarten to university. My understanding of it is that we go from this place of, A, B, C, D, E, F, G to algebra, and at no time does the information from the book, it just keeps getting deeper. And, how I use inventory today is nothing like how I used inventory in the past, because I go to the exact nature of my wrongs, which is my distorted view of my life, of who I am and my identity, and how that identity is incorrect and how I wish it to be so-and-so and to have my instincts met so-and-so and da-da-da. And that soon as I can perceive any of that, I desire it not to be that way. And I'm painting my life with a broad brush here, because talking 37 years. You know, it's a lot of things have happened. So that's my experience with the steps today, is that it's an ongoing, growing experience. You know, I want to touch on heaps. I want to touch on a couple other things. Is that I had mental illness. I was born into trauma. I was seriously traumatized. I had trauma all through my schooling. My father was a screaming maniac. I've had a few traumatic events in my experience in sponsorship. I had a sponsee kill himself on my birthday because I wouldn't do what he wanted. I had an event when, after I'd established a business, I'd got a guy and he basically embezzled and broke the business down about 7 years ago. And the day that the business collapsed, both my parents suicided. And my father took my mother's life first and then his own. That broke me. It snapped me. I could not breathe a breath after that. And it reduced me to a state of barely being able to survive. What happened in my AA life was nothing changed. I did the best I could with the program, as always. I still went to meetings. I still worked with people as well as I could, and I'm not saying it was well. And I did what I could do. But it wasn't much. Now, a couple of really important things happened in this period. Other than the fact my brother took the estate and my family was a traumatic mess. And my wife had to deal with a lot of consequences, and I lost my business and I got a lot of debt. In that period, a couple of really important things happened. One of them was that I paid all my bills. I paid all my creditors. I took responsibility for everything in my life, no matter what the consequences. That enabled me a little tiny place in myself of integrity, because there wasn't much else happening. I can assure you, I was pretty much wrecked. I was suicidal most of the time. I went to a psychologist, and the psychologist said that suicide is contagious. And he said that if you do it, then what's the legacy of your family after 3 family members going? And I remember Gino saying to me, you love others no matter what. So I made the decision that I wouldn't kill myself. Not because I didn't want to do it. Sorry, a bit of a blubberer. But because for their sake. And what that did was the same thing that paying the bills or anything else did. It kept me in touch. That thing inside. And because if I was going to rely on self-love, I was rooted. Because there wasn't any. But what I did have was the capacity to think of others. And that's what I did. And I can't tell you the gratitude for being able to have that capacity when you come from where I come from. And so, you know, I've been dealing with this trauma ever since. And an interesting thing comes from being in AA is, like any organisation, I have an idea of how I should be in a group. But what humility says to me is there's only one way to be. The way I am. Because the truth doesn't just set me free. It sets the people around me free. Because it allows them the capacity to be able to have their journey with the dignity and the grace that they need to have. And as an older member, sometimes the idea can be, and I've had this idea that I should sit up here and kind of float on my little cushion and tell you how connected I am and how separate I am from, conflict or whatever it is. And I have those periods. But more important is how I survive the human traumas and tragedies of life. And my own journey, and a lot of this is what I'm trying to say to you is, this is my journey in AA. I'm one of those people that's mentioned in how it works, that there's people with grave mental illnesses, as long as they have the capacity to be honest. And my wife and I were talking earlier about the capacity to be honest. And sometimes the best honesty I ever had was to be able to say that I don't know what the truth is right now. That's as honest as I can get. I'm blocked, but I'm willing. And I had a sponsor who used to say, be willing to be willing to be willing. If you're that far out, just get that much willingness. So I've covered most of what I think I was going to speak. I might finish early, but no, probably won't. So I'm going to talk about my atheism with a fairly broad brush. So the right to be wrong, what I call the right for the doorknob. Like any group of people, who wants to be on the outside? Now, I've spent many times in Alcoholics Anonymous being told I can't think like I do. Tons of times. It even happened at this meeting 3 or 4 weeks ago. There was a whole mob of people saying, can't think like that. And it was like, yeah, of course. And the thing is, I've got to claim my seat here. I have to claim my seat here. It's like I have to claim my alcoholism. I have to claim my seat. I have to claim the right to have my life and my process in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have to find a way to face that works for me. This is my journey. And in finding that, I find my courage and my usefulness and my dignity and my integrity and all the rest of it, because I stand solid in what I know and what I experience. And I don't have to sell it to you. I just have to live it. When I was going through these other things, my sponsor's called, I've got a sponsor, she's a lovely sponsor. Her name's Polly Pistol, and she's darling. Oh, here we go. Anyway, sorry. Carry right on. So what she said to me was, everything that you've gone through, you can help another person with what you've gone through. And I once had a sponsee said to me, you're so wise, Robert. And I said, there's a difference between being wise and intelligent. Intelligent is you're given information and you work it out and then you do the appropriate right thing. Wise is gathered by walking into a brick wall 450 times and on the 451st going, ouch. So I've done that a lot. So if that's my analogy of wisdom, I'll take it on. But it's the faith that works and the strength thing, and owning my seat is the only requirement. And as Ebby said to Bill, and in my words, if I can't choose my own conception, whose conception am I going to be choosing? It certainly won't be one that makes sense to me, And I will say this as one of the very few atheists in AA, because I get people coming up to me all the time saying, I'm an atheist and I hate God. I went, one of those is wrong. You might have to work out which one. So I'm going to do my summary, and so this is my summary of my experience in recovery. Is first of all, come in and I get what I call the sober breath. in early recovery, which is some time away from alcohol, some time back in life, some time connecting to things that have been lost in the mess of the consequences and the self-obsession of alcohol. And all these periods of time depend on you. Mine was about 7 years, my first early time in AA. That just coming into life thing. You know, first of all, it was the gratitude for clean underwear and not burning the toast. You know, lighting the right end of the cigarette. Being able to put a key in a door for the first time in my life and not having a star on everything I own. You know, it was like, does that Robin live there? Yep, there's a star on his door, there's a star on his car door. Everything had a big star on it from where I missed the keyhole, you know, everything had a star on it. But, you know, that time is a special time. But then there's another time that came on for me, is joining AA. Joining into the steps, joining into the process in the steps, joining into the fellowship in my place in the fellowship. Some of us are like Kimberly, you know, we're natural born kitchen renovators and do what we do, you know, are able to do this sort of stuff. I'm good at sponsorship. That's it. That's all I'm good at. That's my whole thing. I'm not good at anything else, but I'm good at that. But we find our place in AA. We find out what we're good at, and we find out our relationship to the steps, and we start working those steps. And then this really important thing happens is that I discover the me inside my alcohol. And I dig that out, and I start to have the experience of the steps changing that me. And what I found in my story was that before I got sober, before I drank alcohol, I lived a version of myself that wasn't true. I thought I was a piece of crap. I hated myself so badly I could barely breathe. I couldn't bear being in the world. It was unbearable. And it was a lie, it wasn't true. Then I had a drink. And I found another me, which was a maniac. But I was safe inside this drunken bubble. And no matter what I did, you couldn't touch me. And I drove that thing into the ground. I took it as far as I could take it till there was nothing left, petrol tyres, nothing left. It was done. And those two lies I perceived were true for a long time in AA. And what I discovered in the steps was neither of those things were true. I'm not that guy at the beginning. Those things happened. And some of them were pretty horrendous. And the other thing had to happen. It was the only way I was ever going to survive. But what I found in the steps was once I started freeing myself from these lies and my mind telling me things that I should be and shouldn't be, which is all part of the lie, I found someone else. I found a human being. Sorry, it's going to be like that. Dear. And totally a gift of Alcoholics Anonymous. Could not have found it otherwise. I've had a life. I fell in love. I got married. I've had 30 years with my wife. I've been a parent. Still a parent. All the things that go with that. Lived in Vancouver, Canada for 18 months. Yay! Travelled all over the place. Ran a successful business until my alcoholism made me make an inappropriate decision. Life happens. But more importantly than anything else, I got to go to a crisis that broke me open. And we can look at crises as unhealthy. But the first crisis I had was the ending of my alcoholism. It cracked me open enough for me to see the truth. The next one cracked me open enough to find out how to love the world and myself. Jesus. Shocking, isn't it? And really join AA, because before lockdown, I was virtually not functioning here in Australia in AA. I was kind of doing my meetings and whatever, and not really operating at a very high level at all. But once Zoom happened, and I got my little box to live in, I got to be able to join the world of Alcoholics Anonymous and have an unjudged voice and listen to other voices without any of the social stuff that goes on. And it's freed me like nothing else, and I have a very little life on the unemployment benefit and blah, 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 and, I go and see a mental health guy every month and do all the stuff. But my life has just grown and grown and grown and grown in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to thank you very much. I'm going to end early. I'm going to read my reading now, but I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share my experience in this fellowship. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Quickly, before you read your reading, Robin, we just want to thank you on behalf of the 300 people that had the pleasure of listening to you. I absolutely love you, and I've been looking forward to this for the past month since I knew you were going to be speaking tonight. And, like you said, I love that line. If I can't choose my own conception, whose am I to choose? And I absolutely, if there's one takeaway, that is my favorite. And, we do need to be able to understand our conception ourselves, and it has to be personal. And we just want to thank you so, so much before you read your reading. And for those wondering, we did record this share, and it will be on the YouTube channel so that you guys can listen to it again. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I love you, and you can paint. I used to watch you paint.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. All right, I've got two readings. The first one is how Bill sees it.